In this 1908 portrait of two sisters, their matching ribbons hide a secret only they knew. Dr. Rebecca Morris adjusted the archival lamp over her workspace at the Philadelphia Medical History Institute, illuminating the photograph she had been studying for the past hour. The image showed two young girls, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, seated side by side in a formal photography studio. Both wore identical white dresses with lace collars, their hands folded primately in their laps. But what caught Rebecca's attention were the ribbons. Wide, elaborate navy blue ribbons tied in perfect bows atop each girl's head. The ribbons were unusually large, almost theatrical in their prominence. They dominated the composition of the photograph, drawing the eye immediately upward to the girls' faces and away from the rest of their bodies. Rebecca had examined thousands of photographs from the early 20th century during her career as a medical historian, and while matching outfits for siblings were common, these ribbons felt deliberate in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She turned the photograph over carefully. Written in faded ink on the back, Margaret and Eleanor, Philadelphia, August 1908, our precious daughters. Below that, in different handwriting, smaller and hastier, keep this safe, remember them as they were. The phrasing struck Rebecca as odd. Remember them as they were, suggested the photograph captured a moment that wouldn't last, a version of the girls that would change or disappear. She picked up her magnifying glass and examined the image more closely. Both girls had pale complexions, common for the era's indoor lifestyles and photographic technology. Their expressions were solemn, also typical for formal portraits when subjects had to remain perfectly still during long exposures. But as Rebecca studied their faces, she noticed something subtle. The younger girl, seated on the left, had her head tilted at a slightly unusual angle, as if holding it carefully in place. And there, just visible beneath the wide ribbon on her forehead, was what appeared to be a faint discoloration, a shadow that didn't match the lighting of the photograph. Rebecca's pulse quickened. She had seen similar marks before in historical medical photographs. She zoomed her digital scanner over the area, enhancing the image on her computer screen. The discoloration became clearer. It was a bruise, or what remained visible of one after careful positioning and the softening effects of early photography. She turned her attention to the older girl on the right. Her ribbon was positioned identically, tied with the same elaborate bow, sitting at the exact same height on her forehead. Rebecca examined the area beneath her ribbon as well. There, another faint shadow, another carefully concealed mark. Rebecca sat back, her mind racing with possibilities. Two sisters, both with bruises hidden beneath matching ribbons, photographed in 1908. She needed to find out who these girls were and what secret those ribbons were hiding. Rebecca spent the next morning searching through Philadelphia city records, looking for sisters named Margaret and Eleanor photographed in August 1908. The photograph had come to the Institute as part of a larger donation from the estate of a woman named Dorothy Miller, who had died at age 95 with no surviving children. The donation included medical documents, personal letters, and family photographs spanning 3 generations. Rebecca returned to the boxes from the Miller estate, searching for any connection to Margaret and Eleanor. In the second box, she found a family Bible with genealogical records written on the inside cover. There, in careful script, Margaret Rose, born April 3, 1898, Eleanor Grace, born January 12, 1900. Below their names, the same hand had written, "Daughters of Thomas and Alice, God protect them." The phrasing again suggested threat or vulnerability. Rebecca continued searching and found Thomas listed as a physician. Thomas Miller, Doctor of Medicine, graduated from Jefferson Medical College in 1895. His address was listed as Rittenhouse Square, one of Philadelphia's most prestigious neighborhoods. This detail shifted Rebecca's understanding. These weren't children from a poor immigrant family struggling with disease and malnutrition. This was a wealthy, educated family with access to the best medical care available in 1908. Yet something had been wrong with these girls, something their father, the physician, couldn't fix or chose to hide. Rebecca pulled up the digitized records from Jefferson Medical College and found Thomas Miller's graduation records and subsequent career. He had specialized in internal medicine and maintained a private practice serving Philadelphia's elite. His name appeared in society pages, medical journals, and charitable organization boards. He was, by all accounts, a respected and successful physician. But then Rebecca found something that made her breath catch. In the Philadelphia Medical Society's 1910 proceedings, there was a presentation by Dr. Thomas Miller titled Hereditary Blood Disorders in Female Children, a Case Study of Two Sisters. The abstract was brief. This paper presents observations of a rare manifestation of hemorrhagic disease in two female siblings, including challenges in diagnosis, management, and the social implications for affected families. Rebecca's hands trembled as she copied the reference. Hemorrhagic disease meant bleeding disorders. In 1910, that likely meant hemophilia or a related condition. But hemophilia in girls was extraordinarily rare. The genetic inheritance pattern made it unusual for females to have the full disease rather than just carry the gene. She needed to find the full text of Thomas Miller's presentation. If Margaret and Eleanor had hemophilia or a similar bleeding disorder, it would explain everything. The bruises hidden beneath ribbons, the careful positioning in the photograph, the ominous notes about remembering them as they were, and the secrecy surrounding their condition. Rebecca made a list of archives to search and began making phone calls, driven by the need to understand what had happened to these two girls. 3 days later, Rebecca sat in the climate-controlled archives of Jefferson Medical College, carefully turning the pages of a leather-bound journal dated 1908-1910. The journal belonged to Dr. Thomas Miller and contained his personal medical notes, including detailed observations about his own daughters. The first entry about the girls was dated May 1903, when Margaret was 5 years old. Margaret suffered a minor fall in the garden today, striking her knee on the stone path. By evening, swelling had developed far beyond what such a trivial injury should produce. By morning, the bruising extended from mid-thigh to ankle, dark purple and painful to touch. Alice is frightened, though she tries to hide it from Margaret. I am frightened as well, though I cannot let either of them see it. I know what this means, though I have prayed I was wrong. Rebecca read on, her heart sinking with each entry. Thomas had initially hoped Margaret's tendency to bruise easily was simply childhood fragility, but by 1904, he could no longer deny the pattern. The entries documented incident after incident, a bump against a table producing bruises that lasted weeks, a nosebleed that required 40 minutes to stop, a cut on her finger that bled intermittently for 3 days. June 1904. I must face the truth I have been avoiding. Margaret has a hemorrhagic disorder, most likely a form of hemophilia. I have consulted 3 colleagues in confidence, sharing only hypothetical cases, and all agree with my assessment. But this should not be possible. Hemophilia affects males almost exclusively. For a female to manifest the full disease requires both parents to carry the genetic factor. Alice's family must also carry the trait, though she has no knowledge of it. The entries became more desperate as Thomas realized Eleanor, 2 years younger, showed the same symptoms. August 1905. Eleanor, now 5 years old, developed a massive bruise on her forehead after a playmate accidentally bumped her during a birthday party. The bruise is dark, spreading, visible. Alice stayed home with her for 2 weeks until it faded enough to be concealed with careful hairstyling. I am devastated to confirm that both my daughters have inherited this terrible condition. The probability of this occurring in 2 female siblings is astronomically small. Yet here we are, cursed by cruel statistical chance. Rebecca found the entry that explained the photograph. August 1908. Alice insisted we have a formal portrait made of the girls while they are still young, still with us. I resisted at first, knowing how difficult it would be to conceal their condition in a photograph. But she was adamant, and I understood her reasoning. We do not know how long we will have them. Margaret is 10, Eleanor is 8. Every minor injury is a potential catastrophe. We live in constant fear. Thomas described the careful preparation for the photograph. Choosing high-necked dresses with long sleeves to hide bruises on their arms and chest, styling their hair to cover marks on their foreheads and temples, and the ribbons, large, prominent ribbons that would conceal recent bruising near their hairlines while creating visual symmetry. Rebecca continued reading Thomas Miller's journal, and the entries revealed a family living in constant crisis while maintaining a facade of normalcy for Philadelphia society. September 1908, Margaret fell while playing in her room, striking her head on the corner of her desk. The impact was minor, barely enough to startle her, but within an hour a hematoma had formed beneath the skin of her forehead. By evening, her right eye was swollen shut from the spreading blood. We kept her home from school for 3 weeks, telling everyone she had influenza. Alice cried herself to sleep every night, terrified we would lose her. November 1908. I have been researching every medical text available on hemorrhagic disorders. There is so little known, and most of it relates to male patients. The few documented cases of females with hemophilia are brief and often end tragically. The European royal families keep their cases private, but rumors circulate of young princesses and duchesses who died from minor injuries or childbirth. I am a physician, yet I am powerless to help my own children. Thomas documented his attempts to protect his daughters through environmental control, removing all sharp objects from their rooms, padding furniture corners, forbidding them from playing with other children who might be rough, restricting their activities to quiet indoor pursuits. But he also documented the psychological cost. January 1909. Margaret asked me yesterday why she and Eleanor cannot attend the dancing classes that their cousins enjoy. I told her their constitutions were delicate and required careful management. She looked at me with such sadness and said, "Papa, are we broken?" I assured her they were perfect and precious, but I could see she didn't believe me. How do I explain to a 10-year-old that her blood itself is her enemy? Rebecca found entries describing the social isolation the family endured. Thomas and Alice stopped attending social events, fearing questions about why the girls were so often absent or injured. They declined invitations to family gatherings where the girls' condition might be noticed. They created an elaborate system of lies and excuses to explain away bruises, swelling, and prolonged absences from school. April 1909. Alice discovered Eleanor in the garden yesterday crying. She had found a dead bird and was holding it, blood on her hands from where she had tried to help it. Alice panicked, rushing Eleanor inside to wash her hands, terrified of infection or injury. But that wasn't why Eleanor was crying. She said, "Mama, the bird's blood stopped, but mine never does. Why am I different from everyone else?" Alice had no answer that wouldn't break her daughter's heart further. But the most heartbreaking entries were about the bond between the sisters. July 1909. I observed something remarkable today. Margaret had bumped her arm and was developing another bruise. Eleanor immediately went to her room and returned with one of her hair ribbons. She tied it around Margaret's arm, covering the discoloration, and said, "Now we match. No one will know." They have developed their own secret language of ribbons and careful positioning, protecting each other from scrutiny and shame. Rebecca wiped her eyes, moved by the sisters' resilience and their quiet conspiracy to protect one another in a world that would not understand. Rebecca requested access to Pennsylvania Hospital's historical patient records, knowing that the Miller girls must have required medical care beyond what their father could provide at home. After 2 days of bureaucratic navigation and privacy clearances for century-old records, she was granted access to the archived files. She found multiple admission records for both Margaret and Eleanor between 1905 and 1912. The admissions were always listed under false names. Thomas had used his medical credentials to admit his daughters under pseudonyms, protecting their real identities from hospital staff and records that might become public. The first admission was for Margaret in October 1905, listed as Mary Roberts, age 7. The presenting complaint: severe epistaxis, uncontrolled for 8 hours. Rebecca knew epistaxis meant nosebleed. The treatment notes described attempts to pack the nose, apply pressure, use cauterization, all the standard interventions of the era. The bleeding finally stopped after 12 hours, but Margaret had required a blood transfusion, a dangerous and experimental procedure in 1905. Thomas's personal notes clipped to the hospital record were more revealing. I stood helplessly by while my daughter bled from her nose for half a day. The hospital staff looked to me for guidance. I am a physician after all. but I had nothing to offer except desperate measures. The transfusion saved her life, but the donor was a stranger whose blood we could only hope would be compatible. We were fortunate. Next time, we might not be. Eleanor's first admission came in 1906, also under a pseudonym, Emma Peters, age 6. She had fallen from a low stool, landing on her side. The internal bleeding took 3 days to stabilize. The hospital notes described massive subcutaneous hematoma extending from ribcage to hip, with suspected internal hemorrhaging. She had remained hospitalized for 2 weeks. Rebecca found a pattern. Every few months, one or both girls required emergency medical intervention. The hospital records documented bleeding from dental procedures, from minor cuts that wouldn't stop, from unexplained bruising that became so severe it threatened circulation. Each admission was under a different false name, each kept strictly confidential. But in 1910, Rebecca found something that changed everything. An admission record for Margaret Roberts with a note attached in Thomas's handwriting. This cannot continue. The deception grows unsustainable and the girls deserve better than a life of secrets and fear. I have made contact with Dr. William Osler at Johns Hopkins. He has agreed to evaluate them and consider experimental treatments. This may be our only hope. Rebecca knew that name. William Osler was one of the most prominent physicians of the early 20th century, a founding professor at Johns Hopkins Hospital and an expert in blood diseases. If Thomas had reached out to Osler, he was seeking the best medical expertise available in America. She needed to find out what happened next, whether the girls went to Johns Hopkins, what Osler discovered, and whether any experimental treatment had helped them. Rebecca contacted the Osler Library at McGill University in Montreal, where William Osler's papers were archived after his death. She explained her research and requested access to any correspondence with Dr. Thomas Miller of Philadelphia between 1910 and 1912. 2 weeks later, she received scanned copies of 6 letters. The first was from Thomas to Osler, dated March 1910. Dear Dr. Osler, I write to you as a colleague, but more urgently as a desperate father. I have 2 daughters, ages 12 and 10, both afflicted with what I can only describe as severe hemorrhagic disease consistent with hemophilia. This diagnosis seems impossible. They are female, and both are affected, yet the clinical presentation is unmistakable. They bruise from the slightest contact, bleed profusely from minor injuries, and develop spontaneous internal hemorrhaging that threatens their lives repeatedly. I have exhausted the medical literature and consulted discreetly with colleagues, but no one has encountered similar cases in female children. I know of your work on blood disorders and your willingness to investigate unusual cases. I am begging you to see my daughters, to examine them, and if possible, to offer any hope of treatment or management beyond the constant vigilance that has consumed our lives. Osler's response, dated April 1910, was compassionate but cautious. Dear Dr. Miller, your case is indeed extraordinary. While hemophilia in females is theoretically possible if both parents carry the genetic factor, I have never personally encountered such a case, let alone in 2 siblings. I would very much like to examine your daughters and document their condition for medical science. Please bring them to Baltimore at your earliest convenience. I can arrange private accommodation to ensure discretion. Rebecca found the consultation notes from Osler's examination in May 1910. His observations were meticulous, detailed descriptions of the girls' bruising patterns, bleeding times from controlled minor cuts, blood samples analyzed under microscopy, family medical history extending back 3 generations. His conclusion confirmed Thomas's worst fears. These sisters present with classical hemophilia symptomatology, severity comparable to moderate to severe cases in male patients. The genetic inheritance pattern is exceedingly rare but consistent with both parents carrying the hemophiliac trait. Prognosis: guarded. Without breakthrough treatments in coagulation therapy, these patients face significant risk of fatal hemorrhage from trauma, surgery, or spontaneous internal bleeding. Current management limited to prevention, blood transfusion when necessary, and palliative care. But Osler had added a handwritten note at the bottom. I am struck by the profound bond between these sisters. They have developed remarkable strategies to protect one another. Margaret, the elder, watches Eleanor constantly, positioning herself to prevent falls or collisions. Eleanor, in turn, comforts Margaret during episodes of bleeding, singing to her and holding her hand. They have created a private language of gestures and signals that only they understand. Whatever their medical fate, they face it together with extraordinary courage. Rebecca found Thomas's response to this evaluation, dated June 1910. Your confirmation of my diagnosis brings no relief, only the cold certainty that I cannot save my own children. But I am grateful for your compassion and your recognition of their bravery. They are remarkable girls, and they deserve to be remembered as more than medical curiosities. Among the correspondence with Osler, Rebecca found something unexpected, a small notebook that Thomas had sent to the physician in 1911. The notebook contained observations about the private communication system Osler had mentioned in his notes. Thomas had titled it, Documentation of Nonverbal Communication Between M and E, a Father's Observations. The entries revealed an intricate system the sisters had developed to navigate their condition while maintaining appearances in public. Ribbon code. The girls have assigned meanings to different ribbon colors and styles. A blue ribbon tied with bow on the left side means, I am having a good day, minimal bruising. A blue ribbon on the right means, I have new bruising that needs to be hidden. A red ribbon means, I am in pain but managing. A black ribbon means I had a bleeding episode recently and am still recovering. They coordinate their ribbons each morning, ensuring they always match, so observers assume it is merely a fashion choice by matching sisters. Rebecca's heart ached reading this. The girls, so young, had created an entire communication system to warn each other about their condition without alerting adults or peers who might ask dangerous questions. Thomas continued, Hand signals. During social gatherings or school, the girls have developed subtle gestures. A touch to the right ear means, I bumped something. Watch me for signs of internal bleeding. A touch to the left ear means, I'm feeling weak, might need to sit down soon. Clasping hands with thumbs overlapped means, I'm frightened. They can communicate across a room without speaking a word. Positioning strategy. The girls have learned to position themselves in photographs and social settings to hide injuries. They naturally angle their bodies to keep bruised areas away from view. They've practiced sitting and standing poses that look natural but are actually carefully calculated. When one has a visible bruise, the other will draw attention to herself, becoming animated or loud to redirect observers' eyes. Thomas described observing them practice these strategies in front of a mirror. Last week I found them in Eleanor's room, taking turns sitting in different poses while the other evaluated whether any bruising was visible. Margaret said, Turn your left shoulder toward the camera more. Good. Now no one can see the mark on your collarbone. They were 12 and 10 years old, training themselves in deception with the seriousness of soldiers preparing for battle. The notebook also contained touching observations about their emotional support for each other. After Eleanor had a severe nosebleed that required hospital admission last month, Margaret refused to leave her side. She slept in a chair beside Eleanor's bed for 3 nights. I heard her whispering to Eleanor, When I bled last year, you stayed with me. We're together. We're always together. The blood can't take that away from us. Rebecca realized that the matching ribbons in the 1908 photograph weren't just concealing bruises. They were symbols of a profound bond, a secret pact between 2 sisters facing an impossible situation together. The ribbon said, We are the same. We share this burden. We protect each other, and no one else will ever truly understand. Rebecca found a series of letters from 1912 that revealed a crisis point for the family. The first was from Alice Miller to her sister, dated January 1912. Dear Hannah, I am writing to you in deepest confidence about a matter that grows more unbearable each day. As you know, Margaret is now 14 and Eleanor is 12. They have reached ages where society expects them to begin participating in social activities appropriate to young ladies, tea parties, charitable events, eventually courtship and marriage. But how can we allow this when any slight injury could kill them? Last week, a neighbor invited Margaret to a garden party. I had to decline on her behalf, inventing an excuse about her delicate health. Margaret said nothing, but I saw the look in her eyes. She understands that she will never have a normal life, never marry, never have children. Thomas believes neither girl will survive childbirth if they were to marry. We are watching them grow into young women who have no future beyond our protection. But there is something else. Something I have not told Thomas because I fear his reaction. The girls have been talking about wanting to help other children like themselves. Eleanor said to me last month, "Mama, if we must live this way, shouldn't our experience mean something? Shouldn't it help someone else?" I don't know what to tell her. Rebecca found Thomas's journal entry from March 1912 that revealed he had overheard this conversation. "I learned today that my daughters wish to allow their condition to be documented and published in medical literature to help physicians recognize and treat similar cases in other children. They want to give up their anonymity, the carefully constructed fiction we have maintained for years, to be identified publicly as hemophiliac patients." Margaret said, "Papa, Doctor, Osler told us we were rare. If we're rare, then our case is valuable. Other doctors need to know what he learned from us." I am torn between pride in their courage and terror at the exposure. If we publish their case, everyone will know. The neighbors who have wondered why they are so often injured, the school that has accommodated their frequent absences, the extended family that we have kept at arm's length. Philadelphia society, which values pedigree and perfection, will know that my daughters carry defective blood. They will become objects of scientific curiosity and social pity. But the next entry showed Thomas's decision. April 1912. I spoke with Dr. Osler about the girls' proposal. He was moved by their willingness to contribute to medical knowledge, but he cautioned me about the social consequences. Then Margaret said something that changed my mind. She said, "Papa, we already live in hiding. People already whisper about us and wonder why we're different. At least if we let Dr. Osler publish our case, we'll be hiding for a reason. We'll be protecting other children, not just ourselves." I have agreed. Osler will publish a detailed case study in the Journal of the American Medical Association, using their real names at their insistence. The paper will document their symptoms, management strategies, and the psychological impact of living with hemophilia. My daughters at 14 and 12 have chosen to sacrifice their privacy for medical progress. I have never been more proud or more terrified. Rebecca searched for the published paper and found it. Hemophilia in Female Siblings, a detailed clinical study by William Osler, MD, published in JAMA, August 1912. The paper was groundbreaking, providing the first comprehensive documentation of severe hemophilia in female patients. Rebecca found newspaper clippings from August and September 1912 after Osler's paper was published. The medical community's response was scientific interest, but the public reaction was more complicated. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a feature article. "Local physicians' daughters suffer from rare blood disease. Their bravery aids medical science." The article described Margaret and Eleanor sympathetically, but included details about hemophilia that emphasized how fragile and abnormal the girls were. Thomas's journal entries from this period showed the family struggling with unwanted attention. September 1912. Strangers approach us on the street now, some offering sympathy, others staring with undisguised curiosity. A woman at church asked Alice whether the girls would be sent away to an institution for their own safety. Another suggested that we had been cursed by God for some unnamed sin. The girls handle it with more grace than the adults around them. But there were also positive responses. Rebecca found letters sent to the Miller family from other physicians and families. October 1912. We received a letter today from a family in Boston whose young son has hemophilia. They wrote that reading about Margaret and Eleanor gave them hope that they were not alone, that their son's condition could be managed with careful attention. They thanked the girls for their courage in coming forward. Margaret and Eleanor have begun corresponding with several families, sharing strategies for injury prevention and emotional support. They have found purpose in their suffering. Rebecca discovered that Margaret and Eleanor had become informal advocates for children with bleeding disorders, corresponding with families across the country, advising parents on how to manage the condition, and encouraging other patients not to live in complete isolation. Thomas wrote in November 1912, "My daughters have created something extraordinary. They call it the Ribbon Society. a network of families dealing with hemophilia and similar bleeding disorders. They chose the name because of their own ribbon code, and they encourage other children to develop similar private signals and support systems. Letters arrive weekly from families seeking advice, and Margaret and Eleanor respond to each one personally. But Rebecca also found evidence of the physical toll the condition continued to take. Hospital admissions became more frequent as the girls grew older. Eleanor had a severe bleeding episode in January 1913 that nearly killed her. Margaret developed chronic joint problems from repeated internal bleeding into her knees and elbows, causing permanent damage and pain. A letter from Alice to Hannah in March 1913 revealed the family's deepest fear. The doctors say the girls are reaching the most dangerous years. As they mature into young women, any injury becomes more life-threatening. Thomas has forbidden them from leaving the house without supervision. They comply without complaint, though I know it breaks their hearts to be so restricted. They spend their days writing letters to their Ribbon Society families, finding freedom in words since their bodies are imprisoned by their blood. Rebecca needed to know how this story ended, whether the sisters survived into adulthood, and what became of their advocacy work. Rebecca traced the Miller family records through the 1920s and beyond, her heart heavy with what she discovered. Eleanor Miller died in November 1918 at age 18 during the influenza pandemic. Her hemophilia had compromised her immune system, and when she contracted the flu, her body couldn't fight both battles. The death certificate listed cause as influenza complicated by hemorrhagic disorder. Thomas's journal entry from that time was almost illegible, written in a shaking hand. We protected her from every fall, every sharp corner, every possible injury for 18 years. And then a virus, invisible and unstoppable, took her from us. Margaret is inconsolable. She keeps saying, "We were supposed to be together, the ribbons always matched." I don't know how any of us will survive this loss. But Margaret had survived, living until 1956, 46 more years. Rebecca found her obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Margaret Miller, age 58, pioneering advocate for patients with bleeding disorders and co-founder of the National Hemophilia Foundation, died peacefully at her home, surrounded by family. Despite suffering from severe hemophilia throughout her life, Miss Miller dedicated herself to improving care and awareness for others with the condition. She never married, but is survived by numerous nieces, nephews, and the thousands of families she helped through her decades of advocacy work. The obituary included a photograph of Margaret in her 50s, still wearing a ribbon in her hair, blue, tied on the left side. Rebecca recognized the code. "I am having a good day." Rebecca found records showing that Margaret had continued the Ribbon Society after Eleanor's death, eventually transforming it into a formal organization that became one of the founding chapters of the National Hemophilia Foundation in 1948. She had given lectures at medical schools, corresponded with researchers developing new treatments, and counseled hundreds of families dealing with bleeding disorders. In the archives, Rebecca found a speech Margaret had given at a medical conference in 1950. "My sister Eleanor and I developed a secret language when we were children. Ribbons in our hair, signals with our hands, ways of protecting each other without words. We thought we were alone in the world, the only children suffering with blood that wouldn't stop flowing. But when we chose to share our story in 1912, we discovered we weren't alone at all. There were hundreds of families living in the same fear and isolation. Eleanor died 32 years ago, but the work we started together continues. Every child diagnosed with hemophilia today will have access to information, support, and community, because she and I decided that our suffering should mean something. The ribbons we wore to hide our bruises became symbols of connection and hope. That is Eleanor's legacy, and I carry it forward in her name." Rebecca sat in the Philadelphia Medical History Institute's exhibition hall 6 months later, looking at the display she had created. The centerpiece was the 1908 photograph of Margaret and Eleanor, their matching navy ribbons prominently displayed. Surrounding it were Thomas's journal entries, letters from the Ribbon Society, Osler's medical paper, and photographs of Margaret in later years, still wearing ribbons, still honoring her sister. The exhibition was titled The Ribbon Code, two sisters who turned medical secrecy into scientific progress and advocacy. But it didn't stop with history. Rebecca had partnered with the National Hemophilia Foundation to create a companion section showing how treatment had advanced, from the desperate blood transfusions of 1908 to modern clotting factor therapies that allowed people with hemophilia to live normal lifespans. On opening night, Rebecca watched as visitors studied the photograph of the two young girls. A mother approached with her 10-year-old son, who wore a medical alert bracelet indicating hemophilia. "Look," the mother said softly to her son, pointing at Margaret and Eleanor. "These girls had the same condition you have. They were so brave, and because of them, you have the medicine that keeps you safe." The boy studied the photograph carefully, then asked, "Why are they wearing matching ribbons?" Rebecca knelt beside him and explained. The ribbons were their secret code, how they took care of each other. They used them to hide bruises and to communicate without words. They turned something that was meant to hide their condition into a symbol of strength and connection. The boy nodded thoughtfully, then said, "That's smart. They were like a team." "Yes," Rebecca said, her throat tight with emotion. "The best kind of team." That evening, Rebecca returned to her office and wrote a final entry in her research journal. Margaret and Eleanor Miller lived with severe hemophilia in an era when the condition was poorly understood, highly stigmatized, and often fatal. They developed elaborate strategies to hide their symptoms, including a secret ribbon code that only they understood. But in 1912, at ages 14 and 12, they chose to reveal their condition publicly to help advance medical knowledge and support other affected families. Eleanor died at 18, but Margaret lived to see treatments that would have saved her sister's life. Together, they transformed medical secrecy into advocacy that changed countless lives. Their matching ribbons, meant to conceal bruises and maintain normalcy, became enduring symbols of sisterhood, courage, and the power of turning private suffering into public good. May their story remind us that even in our most vulnerable moments, we have the capacity to help others, and that the bonds we forge in shared struggle can create lasting change. She closed the journal and turned off the light, leaving the exhibition in darkness. But the image of two sisters with matching ribbons would continue to speak to visitors, a reminder that secrets can become sources of strength, and that the most profound legacy is often the courage to transform personal pain into collective hope.